القرآن وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين إذ قال يوسف لأبيه يا أبتي إني رأيت 11 كوكبا والشمس والقمر رأيتهم لي ساجدين قال يا بني لا تقصص رؤياك على إخوتك فيكيد لك كيدا إن الشيطان للإنسان عدو مبين وكذلك يجتبيك ربك ويعلمك من تأويل الأحاديث ويتم نعمته عليك وعلى آل يعقوب كما أتمها على أبويك من قبل إبراهيم وإسحاق إن ربك عليم حكيم. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send peace and blessings upon His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In the brief few minutes that I have with you inshallah this morning, I wanted to share a few lessons from a surah that all of us are very familiar with. As I was even reciting, I could see people recognizing which part of the story of Yousuf alayhi salam that we're going to be focusing on today. And it actually is from the very beginning of the story of Yousuf alayhi salam. And actually, before we jump into the story of Yousuf alayhi salam, I always like making a reminder about stories that exist in the Quran. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shares with us stories in the Quran to give us lessons, but also because out of the 36 or so stories that exist in Allah's book, all of them have to do with situations that didn't just happen, but are constantly happening every single day. So when we look at stories in the Quran, for example, when we look at the story of young people who feel like the rest of the society doesn't understand them, that's not just the story of Surah Al-Kahf. That's the story of every young person in the society that they find themselves in. When we find a scenario in which a young woman is being accused of immorality even though she committed no immorality, that is not just the story of Maryam alayhi salam, that is the story of many young women within society. When we find the story of brothers who can't seem to get along or who are competing for their parents' love, that's not just talking about the brothers of Yousuf alayhi salam, that is talking about sibling rivalries as they exist everywhere. We can go on and on about every single story. When we talk about a person speaking truth to power, a person who is disenfranchised from the community or from a lower class of the community speaking truth to power, that's not just talking about Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun, that is talking about every society in which power causes bad things to happen to a certain group of people. So, with that, inshallah, I wanted to get into the story of Yousuf alayhi salam, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces the story of Yousuf alayhi salam in the most beautiful way. And of course, most of us have known this, and it's within the first couple of ayat that Allah says, this is the best story. That this story has so many lessons within it, this story has so many emotional moments, so many literary moments that no other story can really compete. And I'm actually currently writing a book on archetypes within the Quran, and what I look at is archetypes within literature as they've existed. And you can find every single one of those archetypes actually in the story of Yousuf alayhi salam. Current literature actually identifies about 7 different archetypes that every story is really based on. The story of Yousuf has about 14 that we can find within it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off, or actually I'm going to skip to the 4th ayah of Surah Yousuf, in which Yousuf alayhi salam, this young boy, most scholars say he's between the ages of about 7 and 10, comes up to his father. إِذْ قَالَ يُوسُفْ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِي, O my father, إِنِّي رَأَيْتُ, I saw 11 كَوْكَبًا وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ. I saw 11 stars, or 10 stars, and the sun and the moon. وَرَأَيْتُهُ لِي سَاجِدِينَ. And they were definitely bowing to me. A couple of things that are going on here. One is, some of us have heard this before, but Yusuf alayhi salam had such a close relationship to his father that he came up to him and told him about a dream. I know how a lot of our relationships exist within our families, but the father isn't told anything unless it's of the utmost importance. That like a child can't just approach the father and tell them anything. But here's a young child, 7, 8 years old, who saw a dream, and he feels comfortable enough to share it with his father. That's already kind of unique, and we'll talk about a lot of the lessons that come from this a little bit later on. But that's already kind of a unique scenario, and the Quran does this quite often, where the Quran will tell us a detail of a story, but in that detail, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just give details in the Quran in order for us to have entertainment value. In that detail is an amazing life lesson. An example I can give of that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in another story in the Quran, actually in this very story in the Quran, we'll talk about Yaqub alayhi salam. And he will say about Yaqub alayhi salam, this is years later now, I'm going to foreshadow 30, 40 years, when Yaqub alayhi salam's children have disobeyed him in a very, very major way. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that before they left for Egypt, Yaqub alayhi salam told his children, all of you, when you enter into Egypt, make sure to go from different doors. Because if you go from the same doors, there's a risk that something can happen to you. Allah doesn't just give a detail for the sake of giving details. What that many scholars have looked into and have said is, even though his children upset him, Yaqub alayhi salam never cut off relationships with his children. Why? Because what does a typical father do before his children are about to leave somewhere? Here is some parting advice. Yaqub alayhi salam never stopped treating his children with love, even though they're about to do what we know happens in the story of Yousuf alayhi salam. So even with that, a detail is given in order to capture a much bigger reality or a much bigger lesson. But Yousuf alayhi salam, now going back to where we are in the story, in ayah 4, tells his father, I saw this dream. His father, and Yousuf alayhi salam says this in a very unique way, and we'll get to that later, where he doesn't use proper, what would be considered proper grammar in order to describe what's actually happening in his dream. But Yaqub alayhi salam pays attention to his son's words. And Yaqub alayhi salam responds, قَالَ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تَقْصُصْ رُؤْيَاكَ عَلَىٰ إِخْوَتِكَ فَيَكِيدُ لَكَ كَيْدًا إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. O my son, and not just, oh my son. Even when Yousuf alayhi salam says, oh my father, it's not just like, ya Abba. It's ya Abati, oh my dear father. There's almost like this built, I love you, and I'm sharing this because I love you. There's already built into ya Abati. And the same thing is, ya Bunayya. It's not like, ya Walad, oh boy. No, it's, ya Bunayya, oh my little child. Oh my close child. لا تقصص رؤياك على إخوتك. Don't tell your dream to your brothers. And here is actually where I want to get into the first lesson of today. There's only going to be about 3 or 4. He immediately tells his son what we would actually think of as a pretty complex scenario. What does he tell his sons? Don't tell your brothers, because they might plot against you. And the reason I start here as the first lesson to take away is, though Yousuf alayhi salam is young, he's 7 years old, 8 years old maybe. His father trusts him enough to tell him that, hey, your brothers they have some amazing qualities maybe, but they also might do something to you. And the reason I start here for the lesson is, I work as a counselor. And one of the things I can tell you happens, unfortunately, sometimes there are family members that might be bad for children. I know I'm using words lightly here, and I won't in a second. But sometimes there are family members who we know have problems, who have maybe verbally abused someone in the past. Maybe aren't the most honest people. Maybe aren't the most best influences for our children. Yaqub alayhi salam has the wisdom, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will many times actually talk about what a great father Yaqub alayhi salam is. And we have actually a hadith about this. But Yaqub alayhi salam has the wisdom and the forbearance to tell his child, your brothers, you need to keep this from them. Because he is worried about protecting his child. Oftentimes we find ourselves that, because we don't want bad publicity of our other children, of our siblings of our, whoever it could be that has a bad quality that might harm our children, that we don't tell our children. We let them kind of fend for themselves. And that leads to some terrible situations. And again, I don't mean to be the error of dirty laundry, but we hear this happening with children being sometimes verbally abused and sometimes physically abused. And even at times, and even at times being sexually abused or something by members of their own family. And when the whole situation comes out, when they finally seek out counseling, what typically comes out is something like, the parents saying, or someone in the family saying, oh yeah, this happened once before. If it happened once before, why weren't any steps taken? If there were already signs for this, why weren't children protected? Yaqub alayhi salam, again, to a young child is able to say, this could take place. That's one element, and then one or a couple people could then argue, but it didn't work, right? His Yaqub alayhi salam's children, the other brothers of Yousuf alayhi salam, they still ended up doing to Yousuf alayhi salam what they did. They throw him down a well and keep him separated from his father for decades. But why was it still mentioned? I'll get into why it's mentioned, because part of it is the damage protection, another part of it is the trust that Yousuf alayhi salam has in his father. Yousuf alayhi salam, even when bad things happen to him, he has the words of his father, my father tried. It's not, I hate everyone in my family. It's, my father tried to warn me about this and he did everything he could. There's a trust that's built up between Yousuf and Yaqub, and part of that trust gets built up by Yaqub alayhi salam giving Yousuf alayhi salam information or trust that maybe Yousuf alayhi salam wasn't even old enough to handle properly. What I mean by that is, yes, he probably understood, okay, I don't tell my brothers this dream, okay. And he continues to say, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. That actually it's shaitan who's the problem here, it's not just your brothers. It's that shaitan's going to cause people to get jealous. He's telling him actually a very complex scenario. There's such thing as jealousy that exists, and even among siblings there can be jealousy, and when jealousy takes over, people don't control their actions, shaitan controls their actions. There's actually something very, very complex going on here, but Yaqub alayhi salam is willing to tell this to a young child. Some of us treat our children like they don't know anything. That the world is just completely like rainbows and butterflies for them, and they can't handle difficult things. Your children are way more perceptive than we give them credit for. Our children are way more perceptive than we give them credit for. We should actually talk to them at a level that is higher than they can actually understand at this moment. And when we do that to our children, that's what builds trust. Because they realize that we expect more from them, and we expect more from them, that's where they grow. On the other side, when a child feels like a parent knows something, but won't tell them, that breeds the opposite. That breeds, my parents don't trust me enough, because it comes down immediately. We might be thinking in our heads, it's to protect our child. Our child oftentimes thinks, my parents don't think I'm smart enough. My parents don't trust me enough, don't think I'm capable enough. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues. وَكَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ وَيُعَلِّمُكَ مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْأَحَادِيثِ. And Yaqub alayhi salam continues, and just like this, and with this, your Lord has chosen you. يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ وَيُعَلِّمُكَ مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْأَحَادِيثِ. And He will teach you how to interpret everything, every interaction. And the reason I think this is significant is, remember I said Yousuf alayhi salam didn't use proper grammar when he was describing his dream? There's a couple of instances of that. But the first part of it is, he says, إِنِّي رَأَيْتُ أَحَدَ عَشَرَ كَوْكَبًا وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ. One is that he first says, I saw a bunch of inanimate objects. The sun, the moon, 10 stars. And then he says once again, رَأَيْتُهُمْ. I saw them. You don't need to say that actually, because he already said رَأَيْتُ. But he says رَأَيْتُهُمْ instead of رَأَيْتُ, either you could say hunna, because if there's an inanimate object in the Arabic language, it's typically in the feminine form. So it would be رَأَيْتُهُنَّ or رَأَيْتُ that would be one way of saying it, or it would be ra'aytuha, because if you have a plural of feminine inanimate objects, it could be in the singular as well. And then the other thing that he makes a mistake on, or apparently it seems like he makes a mistake on, is lisajidin. In Arabic, there are ways to conjugate a verb, without getting too technical here, that for people, and there are ways to conjugate words for objects. If this was properly said as the sun, the moon, and the stars being objects, it would be lasajida, that I saw them prostrating. But Yousuf alayhi salam uses the tense as if the sun, the moon, and the stars are people. Yaqub alayhi salam picks up on it. And that's why he says to Yousuf alayhi salam, you're already interpreting dreams, and Allah is going to teach you even more. And one of the misconceptions we have about Yousuf alayhi salam is that his miracle was only that he could interpret dreams. That's actually not what's written in the Quran. That we did ahadith is literally the inner meaning of ahadith, all interactions. Yaqub alayhi